Okay, so now let's talk about proofs in geometry. And we're going to fill in the blanks here from the theorems. You might already know linear pair theorem. Remember what linear means. Linear means you have a straight line. And if you have a straight line here, and you have two angles that form that straight line, like a linear pair, then what is the one thing you can say about them? They form a straight line, which is 180 degrees, and that makes them supplementary, just like what we did with the supplementary problems. These two angles are supplementary. Now think about this next one. If two congruent angles are supplementary, so it would have to be two angles that form a straight or form 180 degrees, but they also have to be congruent to each other. Think in your mind, how would you need to draw that? What kind of angles would they have to be if they form 180, but yet they're also congruent to each other? They would have to be 90 and 90. It's the only way they could add up to 180 and yet still be equal to each other. So they would both have to be 90-degree angles or right angles. Right angle congruence theorem. It speaks for itself. Talking about right angle congruence. So what would you say? All right angles are, what word do you think goes right here? Very good, congruence. Right angles congruence theorem says all right angles are congruent, and you'll hear me just call that the right angles theorem because all right angles are 90 degrees. 90 degrees equals 90 degrees no matter what. So all right angles are going to be congruent to any other right angle in the world. 90 will always equal 90. So that is congruent to the other angle. And the last rule for the top page here is vertical angles theorem. Now, some of you, back when we talked about vertical angles, you kind of already came up with this on your own, but now let's go ahead and understand it as an actual theorem, an actual rule. Do you remember what vertical angles look like? From crisscrossing lines. Can you remember when you did vertical angles, when we measured them with degrees and everything, they always came out to be equal to each other. Vertical angles like a bow tie are always equal to each other. That's the congruent mark. And vertical angles like an hourglass are always equal to each other. So basically from this page, the two most important rules that you have come from your linear pairs and your vertical angles, which we studied before. Vertical angles are congruent. Okay, whether they look like a bow tie or whether they look like an hourglass, they will be equal to each other. But linear pairs side by side next to each other, those two angles are going to be supplementary, which means that they add up to 180. All right, quickly let's look at this one here. This rule is important, but it doesn't come up as often. Okay, just watch these examples right here. Look, if the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle D equals 180, that's supplementary. And B and D are also supplementary. What would happen if I told you that angle D, what if I just told you that that was equal to 50 degrees? Then this other angle D right here would have to be 50 degrees also, right? 50 degrees right here. Now think about it. Think about what that means for A and B. If angle A plus 50 was equal to 180, what would angle A have to be? It would have to be 130. 180 minus 50 degrees. So this one over here would be 130 degrees. You're just watching these. These aren't really written in your notes anywhere yet. Same thing here. If angle D, the same angle, if that's 50 degrees and you want it to be supplementary, this angle right here would have to end up being 130 degrees. So think about it. What really happens as a result here? Angle A ends up being equal to angle B. Angle A is congruent to angle B. Whenever they're both supplementary to the same angle, which will be the same degrees in both equations, whenever they're supplementary to the same thing, that means they have to end up being equal to each other. Same thing happens for complementary. Same thing happens for complementary here. Okay, if X is and M add up to add up to 90 and y and m add up to 90. That means they're complementary. So suppose that m here was 70 degrees. Okay? Suppose the angle m is 70 degrees. Well, this angle m, the exact same angle, would have to be 70 degrees also. It's the same angle. Now, what does that mean for the leftover angles? If this is 70 and together they make 90, then angle x would have to be 20 degrees. Well, same thing down here. If this angle is 70 and together they have to total up to 90, then this angle here would have to be 20 degrees. So what does that mean? It means the angle x and angle y have to be equal to each other or congruent. Angle x is congruent to angle y. Please notice that when I'm using the congruent sign, I don't put the little measure mark in front. If I'm using an equal sign, I put the little measure mark in front. Okay, so now go back to your notes to the bottom part of the page and let's just fill these in. Congruent supplements theorem. The word says it all. If you're supplementary to the same angle, then you're congruent to each other. Angles supplementary to the exact same angle or to two congruent angles are congruent to each other. So, example, this one you can write down. M and R are both supplementary to angle T. So that means that M and T are supplementary, they add up to 180, and it means that R and T are supplementary, they add up to 180. Both angles are supplementary to angle T. What does that mean? Take out angle T and what do you have? You have angle M and angle R are equal to each other. Whatever the degrees come out to be for angle T, M and R will both be 180 minus T. Pause if you need to write that down and then come back. Congruent complements theorem says that angles complementary to the same angle or to two angles are congruent to each other. Like this example, angle W and angle V are both complementary to B, so W and B are complementary, they add up to 90, and V and B are complementary, they add up to 90. So angle B is the same in both equations. That means W and V have to be the same in both equations as well. So angle W equals angle V.